Hi there, my name is Dr. Marissa May, and in this video, we're going to work on parallel and perpendicular lines when we're writing equations of lines. Now, huge takeaway that I want you to get for your notes before we get started is that parallel lines have the same slope. We're going to say that over and over and over again with our video today, but I want you to have it in your notes as a good takeaway. The second one is that perpendicular lines have opposite reciprocals. Now, opposite meaning one is positive, one is negative, and reciprocals means that we flipped one and got the other. So if you see here in the example where the slope is 2, the perpendicular slope is negative, that's the opposite part, and the reciprocal. So if you take 2 over 1 and you flip it, making the reciprocal, you would get 1/2 there. Let's take a little practice on this idea of same slope, opposite reciprocals before we jump into some equations of lines. So if we have a slope of 2/3, a parallel slope, remember parallel lines have same slope. A parallel slope would be 2/3. That's right. They would stay exactly the same. But if we wanted a perpendicular slope, we'd have to have the opposite. So since 2/3 is positive, we would need a negative, and the reciprocal, meaning we would flip the 2/3 to get 3/2. All right, let's do one more. If my slope is -4 and I want a parallel slope, that's the same slope, I would use -4. But if I wanted a perpendicular slope, first of all, it'd have to be the opposite. So it'd have to be positive. And you have to think of -4 as -4 over 1. So that when you flip it, you can see that it would be positive 1/4. Positive because of the opposite part, 1/4 because of the reciprocal. All right, I think you got it. We're ready to jump into some equations now. All right. As we're looking at some equations, we have to remember that y equals mx plus b. Remember, that is our slope-intercept form. And we remember it because the number in front of the x, when we're in the form y equals mx plus b, that number is our slope. So if we look at the first example here, y equals -1/2 x plus 4, you can see our slope is -1/2. Because it's written in front of the x and we're in the y equals mx plus b form. If we look at y equals 2x minus 8, then you can see that this slope is 2. So are these two lines parallel? Well, that's just really asking, do they have the same slope? That's a no, right? Are they perpendicular? Are their slopes opposite and reciprocals? And that's a yes. So these are perpendicular here. Okay, let's look at our second example. Y equals x over 7 minus 6. Ooh, that's tricky. Because you have to think, if it's x over 7, what's the number in front of x? Well, dividing by 7 is the same thing as multiplying by 1/7. Let me say that again. Dividing by 7 is the same thing as multiplying by 1/7. So you can see our slope here is 1/7. Okay, look at our second one. This one's written really nice for us, right? Because we can see the y equals 1/7 x. We can see the 1/7 in front of the x, telling us that our slope is 1/7. So these two have the same slope. Therefore, the two lines are parallel. All right, so we've practiced writing slopes that are parallel, writing slopes that are perpendicular. We've also practiced identifying if lines are parallel or perpendicular. And now we want to actually write some equations. Let's take a look. All right, in this example, we want to write an equation of a line in slope-intercept form. That's y equals mx plus b, of a line that passes through the point we are given here and is parallel to the graph we have. So the first thing we need to know is, what is the slope of this line? So in order to find the slope, we're going to have to get the equation in the y equals mx plus b form. That means we have to get y all by itself. So let's start by subtracting 5x. Remember, we cannot subtract 8 minus 5x because the 8 doesn't have an x and the 5 does. So they're not like terms. 5x minus 5x cancel, leaving me with negative 2y equals. Now over here on the right side, I like my x's to come first. So I'm going to write that as negative 5x plus 8. Now I'm ready to get the y all by itself by dividing by negative 2. Watch how I divide each of the terms by negative 2. Makes it a little simpler for me to simplify them. So negative 2 divided by negative 2 is 1y. Negative 5 divided by negative 2 gives me positive 5 halves. Think about it, a negative divided by a negative, giving us a positive. Don't forget my x. And then I've got 8 divided by 2 is negative 4. Okay, so now that you have this equation in the y equals mx plus b form, it's very easy to see that my slope is 5 halves. Okay, that is part 1 of this problem. We had to find the slope because we're being asked to write an equation that's parallel, and parallel means same slope. So what we're going to do in part 2 is we're going to take that slope and our point that they gave us, and we're going to write our equation. Let's start with our y equals mx plus b form. We know our slope, so I'm going to substitute 5 halves for the m. And then remember, our 2, 9 is an x and a y coordinate. So that means in place of the x, I'm going to put a 2. In place of the y, I'm going to put a 9. So let's do that. I've got 9 in place of the y and a 2 in place of the x. Now remember, you can think of that 2 as 2 over 1. So 5 times 2 is 10. 2 times 1 is 2. 10 divided by 2 is 5. And then easily subtract the 5 from both sides, and so we get that b is 4. All right, so we come back to our equation right here. We get y equals 5 halves x. Now we know b is 4, so we'll substitute that. And I have finished this problem. So remember, part 1, finding the slope of the line we were given, because we needed to know what the slope would be for a parallel slope, same slope, right? Then we use that slope and the point to write our equation of our line. Now, I say that to go over the process because our perpendicular example, our next example, is going to be very similar. So let's take a look. So as promised, in this example, we're going to be writing an equation of a line in that slope-intercept form. Remember, that's the y equals mx plus b. We want it to pass through this point we've been given, 6, negative 13, but we want it to be perpendicular to our line. So the first thing we need to know is, what is the slope of this line that we were given? The slope of this line, remember, we can look right there in front of the x when we're in the y equals mx plus b form. This slope is 2/9. But we don't want the same slope. We want a perpendicular slope, which means we have to do opposite reciprocals. So opposite would be negative. Reciprocal means to flip. So now we're using a slope of negative 9 halves. All right, we're still going to use that point, 6, negative 13, and we're ready to write our equation of our line here. So let's start with our y equals mx plus b. We know our slope is negative 9 halves, so we'll substitute that in. And then just like we did before, we're going to use this x and y. This x is 6 and y is negative 13. We're going to substitute those into our equation. So negative 13 in place of the y and 6 in place of the x. As always, you can write that 6 as 6 over 1 because it makes it a little easier. Although you can always use your calculator. Remember, I link the graphing calculator, the free Desmos graphing calculator in the description. Feel free to use that. I've got negative 13 equals, now negative 9 times 6 is negative 54. And then on the bottom, 2 times 1 is 2. So negative 54 divided by 2, that's negative 27. And then I can add 27 to both sides. And that gives me 14 equals b. Now, I'm going to come back to my equation right here. And now that I know the value of b, I will substitute that in. And there's my final answer. So remember, with your parallel or your perpendicular slope, it's a two-step process. You have to first find the slope of the line you're given, then decide. Parallel, same slope. Perpendicular, gonna have to flip it and change the sign. Then use that new slope and the point to write your equation. All right, my friends, thanks for hanging in there all the way to the end of this video. I do hope that this helps you. If you have questions, want to see more videos like this, feel free to leave me a comment there. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.